This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And this week he's taking another look at the weapons from Destiny 2, and specifically some of the guns from its Lightfall expansion.
Okay, before I see this thing in action, I have a very nice view of it. It's the sort of Magnum revolver trope, but it's a bit different, as is this, which I think is probably the closest real gun to this hand cannon.
Let us know what other games or guns you'd like to see Jonathan break down, and make sure to subscribe for more of this kind of content on the channel, including Loadout, which takes an in-depth look at the most iconic firearms in gaming. Right, let's take a look at the weapons from Destiny 2 Lightfall.
This is a pretty garish looking auto rifle of some sort. The classic sci-fi thumbhole stock, which, well, as I say, sci-fi can't seem to get away from, whether it's a phaser rifle or something that's shooting bullets, which this seems to be doing. Cases look a lot like 7.62 by 39, but the report is definitely not that of an AK. And we've got some weird coloured tracer type effects coming out. It's almost like energized kinetic rounds with some sort of energy aspect to them. And I haven't figured out the weird crossbow piano wire type setup on top of the gun yet. Very wacky design, clearly extensive use of some space age polymers or something. As far as behavior goes, it's pretty conventional. You know, it could probably be an M4 or something if this was not set in space. Right, this is ringing a vague bell in terms of the hand cannon as a class of weapon in this game. It's huge, this thing. The reload system, I think, I've seen before, with a sort of speed loader / internal cylinder that's replaced. The yoke that the cylinder comes out on is immense, which would make it very strong, but excessively heavy. And forgive me if I'm repeating myself based on this generic type in Destiny, but the hammer is a bit like on a Nerf gun. Pretty cool, has to be said, as a sort of what you might do if somehow revolvers are worth pursuing, which I don't think they would be, with only 5 or 6 shots. I don't care how advanced your technology is. I can't see us ever going back to revolvers as a mainstream handgun. Don't think that's very controversial, but I'm sure someone will object. The first thing I noticed with this was its unusual overall design. It's a very sci-fi aesthetic to this. It's much less conventional than, say, the revolver that we've seen. Some gubbins hanging off the front there. That is some sort of energy system. But we've got a reload into the magazine. Sorry, into the grip. So, but my overall impression is of an energy weapon, but it's behaving like a sort of machine pistol, like a fully automatic pistol. I could see advanced technology making something super compact, high rate of fire more useful in a future context. Like maybe if that stuff at the front of this gun was some sort of recoil mitigation. Now, another thing I picked up on this thing pretty immediately from the side view was the early 2000s laser device, or what seems to be a laser device on the side. The shape of it, the way it's clipped onto the gun, and the only thing it's missing is a little pressure switch lead coming off the back of it or something. It looks like the old laser aiming device that you used to see on P90s. So no iron sights, can't see this laser looking thing doing any lasing. Of course, you've got your reticle on the screen at all times anyway, so it's kind of academic, but a bit curious. Overall shape of the thing is unusual. It does almost look like it's the way it tapers down at the back, reminiscent of, I don't know, a machine gun top cover. There might be some inspiration from real guns going on there, but it's a stretch. Actually, this does have a full-length pistol slide. It's a very chunky pistol frame, effectively, with a slide on top. So it's very reminiscent of real-world firearms, but it's been taken beyond into the realm of science fiction. Right, I think this gun is ticking a lot of boxes for sci-fi gun for me, in that it's, well, you can tell it's a gun, which is always a bonus, but it's not kind of adhering too closely to present day aesthetics or, well, I mean, technology wise, Who knows? Well, I don't know anyway exactly how this is supposed to work, but it has the tropes of feed device, cocking handle, automatic fire, a red dot type sight or reflex type sight. It's all recognizable FPS type stuff, but the aesthetics and the apparent function of it are nicely far removed, I think. The optic itself looks a bit exposed and maybe a bit vulnerable, but hey, if alloys are that good, then that frame is probably good enough. But it does unfortunately remind me a bit of the spurious optics on the more recent World War II FPS games. That's not the fault of the designer. I think it's just coincidence, but it reminds me of some of those not quite existent or certainly not issued optics from those games. It's not Destiny's fault that they look like that. It's actually an original design. Okay, so I've been going on about things being very sci-fi. This is not very sci-fi. This looks like something that could have existed. In fact, if you've seen the crazy array of Cold War era Soviet firearms designs, some of those are wackier, frankly, than what we have here. On the face of it, this is, well, I was going to say it's a somewhat conventional bullpup rifle, but then when I look at where the bolt appears to be, it's in the wrong place. So we've got a magazine at the back. Obviously contains your cartridges. Very short action behind that, but we know there are ways to feed rounds with such a short action. That's less of a problem. But what's breaking my brain slightly is that we seem to have an AK-esque bolt and a semi-AK top cover over the top of it, well forward. So the chamber seems to be very far forward. But anyway, regardless of the technicalities, the vibe is very much of a conventional firearm firing ordinary ammunition. There's a huge paddle magazine release that looks a bit problematic for accidentally knocking out your magazine. It's the sort of thing that real world designers have to think about, and of course video game designers do not. Overall, I like the sort of alternate or future Cold War-esque look to it. It has AK design cues. That trigger guard is reminiscent as well. Pistol grip maybe less so, but the fact that it has wood on it and green painted metal as well, it manages to look quite futuristic but also retro at the same time. All right, this grenade launcher, pretty conventional. This looks like something that could exist, but is not directly based, I don't believe, on any one launcher. Hence, I have grabbed off the wall here. This is the British Hilton MPRG, multi-purpose riot gun. It's not intended to launch frag grenades. It's a 37mm riot gun, less lethal launcher, but it does have the same top brake system with latch as this appears to have. They will see that in the gameplay footage. Now the receiver, the grip frame bit of this does not extend under the barrel as much as it does on the game version, and this is a bit of an elephant in the room as well. However, the Hilton did allow you to pull that off, and that does give you something that's not a million miles away from that, albeit it has a more traditional riot gun style aperture rear sight rather than the front M79 style tangent type sight, or ladder type sight I should say, that's fitted to a suspiciously Picatinny looking rail on the top of this thing. But it does also have the foregrip, which most British riot guns did not have. This one did. So that's what I've gone with. Although this isn't rifled, and the video game model clearly is. And you do want rifling for a grenade launcher, because you need to be able to land those tiny bombs where they need to go. What's interesting from a real-world parallel perspective here is the bouncing the grenades off the ground and into the people in front of you. That's not done with lethal purpose grenades, because you're going to, well, depending on arming distances, blow up on the ground, or more likely cause significant damage to the round such that it won't initiate. However, it was done historically and controversially with riot gun projectiles, baton rounds. It was thought that by you taking out some energy from the projectile and potentially not hurting the rioter, but in reality what would happen is you just lose control over the accuracy, and the bouncing rubber baton or plastic bullet would hit you somewhere less than ideal, like the face, and cause serious injury. So that tactics were changed. There's a reason why they're now called less lethal weapons, let's put it that way. On a lighter note, it does make for some interesting gameplay to be able to bounce grenades off surfaces, whether that's off the ground, as has been done historically with launchers, and then off walls and things, ceilings. It really changes things up from the usual sort of hit scan affair to a bouncing projectile munition that needs a bit of thought as to where it's going, and of course might cause you damage when it goes off. Okay, before I see this thing in action, I have a very nice view of it. It's the sort of Magnum revolver trope, but it's a bit different, as is this, which I think is probably the closest real gun to this hand cannon. So this is the Door revolver. It's big. It's a sizable caliber. It's British. George Door was a British designer. It's open top like a Colt, and this does have some Colt look to it, but to me it has the arguably more graceful lines of the Door revolver, and especially around the shape of this trigger guard and of the frame. It doesn't have the hump here for the web of the hand, the swell, but I'd be prepared to believe that someone saw one of these at some point, or it could be sheer coincidence, in which case it's an even more impressive design because they've managed to come up with something that looks like a real gun. Right, in action this thing's a bit curious because the hammer is, well, if it's moving, it's not moving enough to actually act like a hammer, and also unlike a real revolver, there appears to be no rotation of the cylinder. Now that's fine with the hand cannons where there's an internal cylinder that's hidden, that is rotating. The major difference between this real gun and this virtual one is there's no pivot point and there's no brake action. To load this is percussion. You would have to cap each of these nipples on the back of the gun with the hammer cocked, which is not ideal, but anyway, and have loaded in here your powder and your bullet. And cartridge conversion, you would have to pop out this wedge. There is a wedge shown on this model, so if they weren't referring to this, they were referring to a Colt. You drive out the wedge, pop off the barrel assembly, and swap the cylinders. You could, in theory, do that. And so this is a cylinder swap gun, but the cylinder's not turning. Another very sci-fi design. I keep saying that on this episode, but bears repeating that this has been consciously designed to look futuristic. Having said that, if you squint, there are F2000 vibes to this. I think I might be reading into it, but the separation of the lines, sort of panel lines on top, are a little bit reminiscent. The general curvy tactical tuner shape, and what looks almost like, or reminds my brain at least, of the flip up breech lid that's on the F2000. But it's not a bullpup. Yeah, it's not necessarily going to remind you of an F2000, but it did me. One design feature that is something we see on real guns, but not tremendously practical for what's essentially an assault rifle like this, is the big support rib for the magazine. We see designs that have that. You have it on weapons that fire big or use big chunky feed devices like the AA-12 because it needs that structural support. Something like an assault rifle does not need that. You just shove the magazine in and it's held in by the catch and by the shape of the magazine well, and that's fine. So you don't need the extra protrusion coming off the bottom of the gun, making it taller when the magazine isn't fitted. You don't have to, in the middle of a firefight, make sure it guides properly into the channel. Works well with the aesthetic. It sort of balances out a little bit the big chunky gun bit from the slightly slimmer magazine bit. It blends it more. So I see why they've done it artistically, but it's something that stuck out for me. A pump action shotgun. in space. This happens a lot. We cannot get away from, perhaps we shouldn't get away from, the good old-fashioned 12-gauge pump. It's just everywhere. They existed in the Old West, and some games include them in their Old West setting. You see them in the First World War, Second World War, Vietnam, present day, the future. There's just something very cool about the old pump action, especially if you can use that slower rate of fire to offset a more powerful shotgun blast. And so really it's an aesthetic sort of skin for a Remington 870 or something. To be fair, is aesthetically, well, you know, it's not Winchester 1897 or a Remington 870 or something in space. It is its own design. At the end of the day, it's a pump action shotgun. Okay, a very Destiny name for this thing, Deterministic Chaos. I suspect there's some lore behind that. Well, I know there's some lore behind that because we have a quote from Schrodinger there. It certainly does not look like a conventional gun, other than having a belt of some sort of energy ammunition and a distinct belt, box, drum type thing. It's looking a little bit less than ergonomic at the rear there. Something unusual going on with the sighting system. And of course the aesthetics are pretty unusual, at least by modern standards. Let's have a look. There's some thought gone into functionality here for that belt of purple space laser ammo, in that there's a huge long MG42-esque, big long top cover opens up to flick your belt across and load the thing. That's cool, except that the trend is pretty clearly now towards very short top covers, because what people want is a stable mounting platform for optical sights. They don't want to have to design a super tight lockup for a big long top cover. That makes sense. So we have energy rounds that have some sort of metal casing that is not being ejected from the gun. There's no way for it to be ejected, so it's all going downrange. Some point, I guess the casing acts like a sabot or something, or maybe it stays with the energy round all the way down, and it's just a form of caseless ammo with a sort of energy payload. It's a semi-hybrid of what we have now, or maybe something like telescoped ammunition, or caseless telescoped ammunition. It's meant to evoke the belt-fed machine gun, but with purple space lasers. A very cool, edgy name for this one, and it's a bullpup, so I automatically like it. And a very firearm design, so it's not, I presume, not an energy weapon. Can't see any. Well, the significant design cue is probably the cutlass-style trigger guard, which is probably from the Tavor, and maybe the blocky front end with the barrel protruding is a nod to the X95 Tavor. I think I'm reaching there. It's a slick little design. The obvious drawback would be the short length of pull, so the distance between the grip and the butt plate there is super short. It's not ideal for a conventional firearm in terms of managing recoil or in terms of cramped ergonomics. You would want, if this was real, you would want a VHS 2 style adjustable butt plate on the back. The more you look at these things, the more you can see design cues from real guns, but you're at great risk of reaching because this is so far removed. All right, seeing this in action, it's more clear now to me that this is in fact a DMR, semi-automatic, or if you must, battle rifle. And I'm slightly allergic to that term. Probably could have spotted that from the sheer depth of the magazine, which is quite reminiscent of various 7.62 by 51 magazines. The magazine has what looks like a paddle release at the front that doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Or is that a sling swivel? If it's a sling swivel, it makes even less sense. I'm just going from what I can see at the moment, but there's no obvious magazine release that's being used. It's almost like it's got an automatic eject system for the magazine, but there could be a catch that I'm missing somewhere. Okay, guys, those were more guns from Destiny 2. I know we have some big Destiny fans out there that were waiting for more of these, so I hope you enjoyed those. Thanks very much for joining us. Check out our Royal Armouries social media channels, our own YouTube channel if you'd like to as well. Otherwise, we will see you again here on GameSpot next week.